I'd like to introduce Dr. Ken Evans. Ken is the President and CEO of the Ontario Cancer Biomarker Network since it was founded in 2005. He also, for this presentation, heads up in the INDOC consortium, which is responsible for the development and implementation of BrainCODE. And he'll talk to us about BrainCODE today to put a little more meat on the bones of what Khalid has just described to us with regard to ISIS and BrainCODE. So with that, Ken, I'll invite you to give your presentation.
Thanks, Ron. So yes, I'd like to go over a bit of background on the BrainCODE platform, what it's been designed to do, and how it's addressing some of hopefully all the issues that we've been hearing about, as well as some other background on the platform. So BrainCODE has a broad mandate. It's intended to be an extensible informatics platform that's going to manage the acquisition and storage of this high-dimensional data that's going to be generated from all of these different research programs, as well as potentially other sources as well. And this is being collected from patients not just with a variety of different technologies, but also from a variety of different brain disorders. And so it introduces a number of different issues in terms of data sharing, as well as in terms of federation of complex data. So privacy and security was foremost in our thoughts when we were putting together the notion of BrainCODE, and it's certainly a key element of the core principles. The goal here was from the very beginning to live by the highest standards of privacy and security, which is another set of issues, as well as to establish an extensive policy framework and governance apparatus that can manage all this, and also that can make it public so that people can go and refer to this and understand where things are coming from and why it was built this way. But there are a number of other issues that BrainCODE also has to address. For example, standardization. It's important that apples can talk to apples here, and for the data that's being collected from a variety of different sources, common data elements are a critical way to get that done, so that you know that a headache in one program means the same thing as a headache in another program, and you can start accumulating data and understanding across databases how things are working. Common Data Elements platform is being built now. It's already in place in terms of demographics, but is also being now developed across a number of different interesting endpoints, including things like depression and so on, that will allow these programs to compare themselves to each other for various reasons. Federation is another huge issue when it comes to large-scale databases. You're federating data here not just across the research programs, but with all these different kinds of technologies. So genomics data, proteomics data, imaging data, clinical data, these are all very different kinds of data, and to put them into sort of one source is a set of complex issues which many are struggling with. And this is a key role that BrainCODE is fulfilling, and I think that it's also an interesting place where we're putting ourselves, I think, at the forefront of where large-scale data collections are going in the future. Analytics is obviously another part of it, and it's also part of the solution. By putting together a platform that can enable the analytics of these high-dimensional data, you're obviously going to amplify research outcomes. That's sort of the whole point of it. But it also is a way in which you can establish a platform whereby special kinds of analytics can be done within a secure environment that would allow you to do work on data that otherwise you may not allow. You wouldn't necessarily allow the data to go out into the public, but you might allow it to occur in a lockdown sort of circumstance. And so that's another way to manage the issues with privacy and security. Right from the beginning, we wanted to do this right, so we put together a consortium of people that are all experts in their given technology and their given field for actually building the platform. But from the very beginning, we were also going out to the world. An international advisory committee was put together by OBI, and we have a large number of consultants and other individuals, partners, people that are doing similar kinds of things in other parts of the world, to which we're referring, getting advice from, really trying to find the best way to do things. And that's an ongoing process, and it will continue to be that way in the years to come. Privacy and security is what we're talking about today, and so I thought I'd go into a little bit of detail about how we're handling all this. adhering to the highest levels of data privacy and security is a nice thing to say, but to actually do it is there's a set of issues that one has to address. And it is a moving target in many ways as the technologies improve, as our ability to re-identify individuals from high-dimensional data sets evolves. It's obviously going to be something that we're going to have to address as things go. Right now, the way we're dealing with this is in a number of fashions. So first of all, security. It's absolutely critical, obviously, that the security is the highest level. We work with the High Performance Computing Virtual Lab as one of the INDOC partners, the HPCVL, and it was built according to, first of all, meet the rules of HIPAA and the FDA's 21 CFR Part 11, the Code of Federal Regulations within the United States, which is really established as a fairly high bar, or in fact the highest bar, for compliance with regulations in terms of security. There's a number of other systems that have been put into place with regard to the HPCVL, and we believe it's a unique facility, the only facility of its kind in the country, and it's a great spot to do this kind of work, and so we're really privileged to be able to use that as our platform. Encryption and de-identification tools, you've already heard Khaled speaking about this in some length, and I think I'll leave it at that, but other than just to say that by establishing these sophisticated algorithms for record linkage, as well as for re-identification risk assessment, we've had, I think, a platform that meets those kinds of requirements that have been established by the Privacy Commission and other groups. I think that this is sort of the highest bar that we can at this point. But there's also, looking to the future, trying to find ways to deal with things like genomic data. I mean, if you're looking at individuals which have a couple of unique genetic properties, you are obviously going to run into risks of re-identification if there's a very small number of those people. And so finding ways to deal with that is also something that we're constantly working with. The privacy systems themselves, the conceptual privacy impact assessment was completed in consultation with the Information Privacy Commissioner, and we were designated a Privacy by Design ambassador, which we're very proud. We will do updated PIAs as time goes on, as the platform evolves and unfolds, and this is going to be an ongoing process to ensure that we're meeting whatever we need to do to try to make this meet the best requirements we can. Governance, of course, as I mentioned, there's extensive policy framework and governance apparatus in place, and this is not only to be in compliance with regulatory issues, but also with the RBs, and it's important to note that the RBs may have their own special requirements, particularly when you're talking about special patient populations, and these are things we have to respect and find ways to work through. The INDOC consortium, my group, the Ontario Cancer Biomarker Network, is the overall INDOC lead and is providing clinical and molecular data management for the BrainCODE platform. EHIL, as we already heard from Khaled, talking about security and de-identification and risk assessment, critical elements of this. The Rotman Research Institute, the Neuroinformatics group under Stephen Strother, who is managing the data from the neuroinformatics side of things. So we're talking about neuroimaging, could be EEGs, could be PET, could be MRI, and so on. And finally, of course, the HPCVL, which we've already mentioned, under Ken Edgecombe, which handles not only the high-performance computing, the processing, and so on, but also as petabyte-scale data storage to manage these very large data sets that we're talking about. The core configuration of BrainCODE is established really to allow the input of all these different kinds of data. There's no such thing as a single platform that can accept data from all these different kinds of technologies, different kinds of research programs. So this has to be built on the basis of a number of different kinds of research platforms, e-data platforms, but it also needs to have a database federation system in place that would accept all these different kinds of data, put them in one place, and then allow them to have access to the appropriate individuals. So the federation part is being handled with a number of programs. Again, there's no single platform that's going to meet all of everyone's needs. So we're right now working with things like BioMart and Transmart and other platforms that will allow this kind of federation to occur. But the input of the data coming from each one of the centers is going through various programs. In clinical data, for example, there's 3 different platforms being used for clinical data collection: Metadata Rave, which is more of a regulatory compliant kind of platform, OpenClinica, and REDCap. As well. All of these are different platforms, and so the federation here has to occur where the clinical data can talk to the clinical data, and that's a really important part of what BrainCODE is. But it's also, I think, going to be a very useful tool for individuals in the future as data is being collected from a lot of different programs. Spread is a platform, and XNAT for the imaging data. Molecular data, again, there's a number of different platforms being used for that. Basis is an example of that, where it can collect data from several different sources. And then, of course, there's other kinds of data as well, cognitive data sets and so on, which require their own platforms, all of which is going into a single federated database and accessible through a portal, which we'll talk about. So the portal looks like this. It's a fairly streamlined, simple platform. This is the page that would be accessible to anyone, and so they could come in and they could learn some information about BrainCODE. We will expand this page and make it look prettier as time goes on, add more information into it. But out of this page, you can access information about each of the programs. The idea would be this would be an outward-looking page that would be useful for anyone, say a patient even, to understand more about what's going on. So in this case, we're looking at the Kanban page for the depression program, and you'll notice that there is a sign-in page here that allows the username and password to be put in, and that would allow restricted access for individuals that are involved in those programs. So at this point, they can get inside the platform and look at things like here. We have a forum for that particular program, and we would also have a file structure that you can put in various documents. This would be a place where you could write papers together and so on. And so it's got utility beyond just the actual data that's being collected within the research programs, and it's also used to support the research itself, and that was part of the purpose of it. The Data Access Committee and the process for accessing data is included on this, as well as the actual tools themselves. So if you want to enter data into, say, Open Clinica here, this is where you would access it. You click on that, you're inside the system, and you can start doing the work that you need to do. On top of this, there are other tools available, such as Lime Survey. Some of you have been involved in the Common Data Elements program, where you're actually filling in these kinds of forms. So forms can be built, and certainly within each one of the platforms, forms can be built. There will be a library of forms that could be used in the future for gathering other kinds of information and making it easier for other programs to use the same form, so that it can be then more easily compared to things. Why the linkage is important? I think we've been talking about all these various linkages. I think it's very important to talk about that. Health records are one obvious example where if you are collecting data from a patient, it would be nice to not have to fill in masses of forms, and which may even not be accurate historically, but be able to get direct access to health records. That could create a great way to amplify data that's being collected within one study. Hospital records, historical lab data, maybe other research programs. All of these things together, when you put them, add them to a given data set, it's going to amplify it in a number of different ways. But in my view, aggregating these data is going to open up entirely new avenues for how you do research. So if you can access all these different kinds of data sets, you do one genomic sequence, and you can access their lab records forever. You can start answering questions that may have had nothing whatsoever to do with the original purposes of the study. And so again, it's an efficient and pragmatic way to really move in new directions for research. So part of the problem, though, when we're building a platform like this, is that there are different needs for different kinds of data, and the way in which you interact with the data may change depending on what part of the program you're talking about. So for example, when you start off at running a study as an ID program, you're interested in the issues associated with that particular study and actually running the study and collecting the data, and you may have needs for collecting personal health information or whatever for particular reasons within the program. So there's those kinds of needs. There's also needs for, once the data starts to be aggregated, the federation of that data in with other data sets. And then finally, when the rubber hits the road, you need to deal with the actual mining of the data and have a platform that can manage that. Each of those things is a different set of issues when it comes to designing a database. And so BrainCODE was designed with a zones concept, where there are 3 different zones to manage this, to make it so that it works, but it still is respecting all the different issues, particularly with regard to security and privacy. So to get into this in a bit more detail, the data that is being collected by each of the ID programs is going to have to go into a database. Now, that would be true whether the BrainCODE existed or not. And so typically what would happen is that database would involve multiple different research centers having to share data. That has certain regulatory and legal implications, and what is really required here is that the Health Information Network Provider, a HIMP, is created that would serve that purpose of enabling that degree of interaction. So OBI and BrainCODE is operating as that HIMP. Encrypted data transfer occurs from the programs or from each of the ID centers directly into the system, and this forms Zone 1. Within Zone 1, and sharing can occur within the research program, but not outside of it. And that is basically a lockdown system that would ensure that the kind of thing that you would normally do as any part of any research program can be done within BrainCODE. But it also ensures that the things are being collected in a way that will allow it to move on to into the other zones where the sharing can occur. Within Zone 1, it's possible there would be PHI there. It's also possible that, for example, we may need to do certain de-identification things in a central database. So, for example, dealing with the images, stripping away faces, for example, this kind of stuff can potentially be done, but it may be too labor-intensive for each of the research sites to manage, and so this is the kind of thing that might well be done within Zone 1 down the road, but still, again, within a secure environment. Obviously, it is absolutely critical that the appropriate agreements are in place between the ID institutions and OBI, as well as that the informed consent form language is appropriate to the task. This stuff has to be done up front. It creates all sorts of issues for everyone concerned. It's a complicated process, but it's a necessary process. And once it's in place, it will ensure that from then on you're compliant. It also is something that once the process is well established, it makes it easier for future programs to be part of all this and everybody operating under the same set of rules, which I think is a great advance in this field. Zone 2, of course, is where the data is stored. As I mentioned, this is a lockdown database. Nobody has access to this except for the actual data managers. Similar structures are used in many different groups. ISIS uses a similar sort of thing. The pharmaceutical companies would use a similar sort of thing, where there basically is a data management team that's responsible for working with this federated data from all these different sources, but they're not sharing that with anybody else. So this is really a lockdown system, and it's not something that you even as researchers could access. Zone 3 is where the analytics can be conducted. This is where the data mining occurs, and this is actually where most of the issues start to happen, because now you're talking about taking data out of that federated lockdown system and making it available to somebody. And so that's where all of the concern issues with regard to risk-based assessment and so on, and that's where a lot of Khaled's work will come in. It also could be that there are people that are given special access privileges because of the nature of their experience or qualifications and so on that may be able to work within this, but obviously analytics is required within the BrainCODE platform itself. So this is where de-identified data is released. RAB approval is required. The Data Access Committee that's been set up by OBI has to approve all this, and that's how this all works. I don't want to delve into the details of what the zones actually look like, but I did want to make the point that while there are certain similarities across each one of these zones in principle, in practice they are actually very different. The technology and architecture that's required to manage all this is actually quite different, and there's a huge process involved in establishing how the zones work. This is great architecture. We're happy to share this with other groups as well as we build this. And I just wanted to thank the INDOC team. It's a large number of people who have been involved in this from various groups and from various parts of the program, not just within INDOC, but also external to it, the international committees, as well as various consultants and partners from around the world. It's really a privilege to be involved in such an exciting program. Thank you very much.